Our favorite Springfieldian family has always seemed to have a knack for predicting the future. When you make that much television, you're bound to write something that happens in real life somewhere down the road. Art imitates life, and in turn, life imitates art. Some folks might call this predictive programming, or maybe claim that it's an insidious plot to keep us complacent in the changes happening around us. I call it a bunch of TV writers doing their best to come up with wacky scenarios every week. Potato, potato, I guess. For whatever reason, folks really jumped on the latest wave of Simpson prediction conspiracy theories, and with that, lots of wild stuff has been linked to the show. Whether you believe it all or simply think that it's a coincidence, there's no denying the appeal of looking to a popular cartoon for a potential glimpse into humanity's future. We've seen all sorts of predictions seemingly come true over the past few years, and folks are flabbergasted by the idea that the folks at Fox were ready for so long. Take the recent Kamala Harris-Lisa Simpson connection. The purple suit caused a whole lot of synapses to fire across the internet, and I don't think some folks will ever stop talking about it. And if we delve back even deeper into presidential conspiracies, what about that time the Simpsons predicted the Trump presidency? Sure, it was played for a gag, but somehow this television businessman made his way into the White House. So for all of the predictions they've made, including the apocalypse, so-called, on Inauguration Day, some are still outstanding. They can't get them all right after all, but there are a few that really do feel like they could be accomplished in the next little while, whether they're technological advances, insane political maneuvers, or wild twists of fate that will affect vast swaths of people. So let's get right into the predictions that might come true in 2022. Are we really already 3/4 through 2021? Time sure does fly when you spend all of it on the internet. Godspeed. So the first prediction I want to analyze today is from the episode titled Lisa's Wedding, where the writers quite literally take a look into their characters' futures. The Simpsons family is thrust forward a couple dozen years, and we get to see them all grown up. Marge and Homer are looking significantly older, and Bart, Lisa, and Maggie are now full-grown adults at this point. And of course, as the title suggests, Lisa is getting married, to a Brit no less. The family takes a trip to England to meet their new in-laws-to-be, and during their stay they encounter all sorts of wacky predictions concerning what the future might look like. One of the most iconic and oft-referenced things from this future London is Big Ben, the famous clock tower striking out the hours for all to hear. Back before personal timepieces were commonplace, many people had to rely on things like clock towers to even know what time it was. We've really changed things up since then, as time is more important than ever when it comes to running businesses that are reliant on international cooperation and digital platforms. With this in mind, you can turn your attention to the newly digitized Big Ben, sporting a clock face that looks like it belongs on a Casio. It does away with a lot of the analog charm and history associated with the tower, doesn't it? But it's more efficient, so why not make the jump? Then you can have everyone sync up their personal clocks to Big Ben via Wi-Fi, and nobody can be late for anything ever again unless you want to try and make an excuse that works around this newly efficient system. Of course, it's doubtful that Big Ben will ever be fully made digital. There's too much history there, too much tourism potential. However, with the way things are going right now, digital seems to be rapidly overtaking analog in all sorts of ways. More people rely on digital, centralized clocks to plan their lives, whether that means using a phone clock or the one on their laptop. Watches have largely become accessories or jewelry, unless they can be used for step counting or connecting to the internet. I haven't been in a classroom for a while, so I can't really tell you the last time I saw a proper wall clock. Billboards are opting to become enormous LCD screens to maximize the amount of ads they can display. All of this to keep things connected and seemingly integrated. So what's to say some hotshot in tech wouldn't suggest that Big Ben be brought into the age of information? As we speak, Big Ben is undergoing some renovations too. That's right, in 2017 the bells were silenced, the dials were scheduled to be reglazed, lighting was set to be upgraded, and a lift was even planned to be added. No public announcements about digitizing the display, but nothing is certain, right? And guess when this upgrade is due to be finished? 2022. There's still the possibility that Big Ben could be shaped into the form we witnessed on the Simpsons' quasi-canonical foray into the future. Speaking of technology run rampant, let's move on to the next possible prediction. We've seen a lot of wonderful advances in tech over the past few decades, bringing us levels of luxury and efficiency we could previously only dream of. Of course, this kind of advancement is a double-edged sword, with every benefit bringing along some sort of damage or detriment. The more nice things we have, the more garbage we produce. The more comfortable our homes and workplaces are thanks to air conditioning and fuel-powered energy, the more damage we could do to the environment. Plenty of greener options are available for consumers and businesses alike, but the profit motive of using the cheaper, dirtier methods remains. With the way things are going, we could very well end up with a bit of an environmental disaster on our hands. It's slowly working up to Armageddon right now, with many irreversible milestones about to be reached, but that kind of slow march towards doom is easy to ignore. If someone were to, say, dump a large amount of hazardous waste into the water supply or set off some sort of reaction that burns up enormous tracts of land, then we'd have to do something. Folks have tried fighting the fires set by gender reveal parties and in the ocean, and done their best to clean up oil spills, but it's tough. Wouldn't it be easier if we just contained the disaster so the rest of the world could breathe easy? Well, The Simpsons predicted just such an event occurring and came up with an ingenious solution. Put a dome over it. You might remember this from the Simpsons movie way back when. After Homer dumps all of his pet pig's droppings into a local waterway, things get bad fast. Thus, a wonderful, benevolent government official decides that the best option is to totally quarantine that area in the most literal way possible. Dome. I wouldn't be surprised if it happened next year, to be completely honest. All it takes is one dude stockpiling crude oil in Rubbermaid containers, dumping his stash into the river. Or maybe an NFT farm will catch fire so spectacularly no one can hope to put it out. And to cap off our predictions for the day, why not go with the classic billionaire blocks out the sun bit. Stranger things have and will continue to happen. In the episode Who Shot Mr. Burns, the titular nuclear power plant owner decides that he would make a whole lot more money if no one could experience the sun's rays. To ensure that his nuclear-powered electricity was sold as a monopoly, he erects an enormous device meant to literally block out the sun, plunging Springfield into darkness. Although I don't think anybody today would be able to pull this off for political, technological, and general moral reasons, we have seen major corporations do their best to keep monopolies thriving so that customers pay out the nose for something they could otherwise get for next to nothing. Nestle diverting water, bottling it, and selling it back to people at a profit seems to be about equivalent, doesn't it? Well, going back to literally blocking out the sun, I again don't think someone will put a machine on Earth to do it. I can see this going one of two ways. Option 1, we continue to wreck the environment and produce massive amounts of waste and fumes. Eventually, smog and smoke manage to semi-permanently settle in our atmosphere, stopping the full rays of the sun from ever reaching the surface. Sounds like fun. Option 2 involves all these billionaires continuing their personal space race to the point where satellites orbiting Earth are simply too plentiful. We'll start seeing the blanket of machines from the surface, and soon enough they'll cross over the sun like clouds on an overcast day. It might not be intentional on the surface anywhere, but if this happens, a billionaire will have blocked out the sun. The future, everyone. So that just about sums up the Simpsons predictions I could see happening in the far-off year of 2022. History seems to be moving faster than ever these days, although I think that does have something to do with the fact that we're always chronicling everything from every conceivable angle. Wild how that works, right?
Did The Simpsons predict Russia invading Ukraine? The Simpsons is one of the most successful TV shows in the history of the planet. They've grossed millions upon millions of dollars and have done things other shows could have only dreamed of. Video games, books, board games, theme parks, you name it, and The Simpsons have done it. This obviously goes hand in hand with the fact that they have 33 seasons under their belt. It's currently the longest running scripted American primetime television show, and it has 10 whole seasons on second place. The Simpsons has been running on TV longer than I've been alive, and there's no reason to believe it's gonna stop anytime soon. Having 33 seasons to their name and 717 episodes in total, they've covered a wide variety of stories. Being the zany, animated, satirical comedy that it is, they've touched on some things that are pretty unbelievable. Whether it be Homer having the mob shoot an adult film in his house to completely destroying Springfield with garbage, The Simpsons are always doing something insane and outlandish. Most of the time, these things remain in their hysterical animated fantasy land and never come to fruition in real life. However, there have been some instances where the crazy things that they do on TV actually play out in real life. Enter The Simpsons predictions. If you look up The Simpsons predictions on the internet, you will find a ton of articles detailing all the times The Simpsons have predicted something in the future. You see, being on for 33 whole seasons means that a lot of real time has passed, which then means that tons of the stuff that you've written about has the potential to be proven correct. Let's take a look at some of the most famous examples. How about in season 11, episode 17, when Lisa becomes president and says the line, 2009, we inherited quite the budget crunch from President Trump. Season 11 of The Simpsons would have come out in 1999. Fast forward 15 years though, and look at what happens. How about in season 23, episode 22, when Lady Gaga comes to the cartoon and wears almost exactly what she would later wear at the Super Bowl halftime show? Or how about for a less conventional one, where in season 5, episode 19, the lunch lady puts a bunch of horse meat in the children's meals, and then many years later a scandal involving Taco Bell and some other food chains found the very same horse meat in their products. I could go on and on with other examples of The Simpsons predicting various things, but I think that you guys get the point. Either way, it's safe to say that The Simpsons aren't new to the whole prediction game. But with all that being said, did they predict Russia invading Ukraine? Well, before I fully answer that, let's just take a quick look at what's happening in Ukraine to see if anything The Simpsons have said would have matched up with that. Well, as we've talked about several times on this channel recently, Russia and Ukraine are currently not on the friendliest of terms. Taking a brief trip back in time to December 1st, 1991, Ukraine got its independence. It was on that date that the entire country held a vote, and a staggering 92.3% of Ukrainians voted to become their own independent nation. This was after a long history of being controlled by the Soviet Union, and prior to that being attacked and oppressed by not only the Russians but several other countries too. Something that gets forgotten far too much is that less than 100 years ago, back in the 1930s, a full-on was committed against the Ukrainian people by Joseph Stalin. He specifically starved those that lived there, with survivors saying that Russian soldiers would see them making a soup of water, leaves, and twigs and force them to dump it out. It's things like this that led to the overwhelming support of independence in 1991 by all the people living in Ukraine. Even though many of the Ukrainian people rejoiced at this vote, the Russians weren't too happy about it. Ever since Ukraine has become their own country, Russia has refused to acknowledge it and believes that they should be an extension of Russia. In their mind, Ukraine has so many people of Russian descent already that they should just be in Russia. Not to mention that their culture is very similar to the Russian culture because they were under Russian control for so long. Anyways, very simply, Russia wants Ukraine, but Ukraine doesn't want Russia. This is why in 2014, Russia forcibly annexed the Crimean Peninsula, an area of land that was particularly important to the Russians. Before 1954, it used to be part of Russia but was transferred over to the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic and then retained after they got their independence. This meant that tons of the people living there were initially Russian, and Russia wanted them back. Heavy sanctions were enforced on the Russians, but it wasn't enough to deter them from this annexation or from potentially taking more. Fast forward to right now, and currently over 100,000 Russian troops are just chilling right by the Ukrainian border, looking like they could march in at any given moment. Putin has come out and said that they have no plans to invade, but actions speak louder than words, and moving that many troops to that spot doesn't seem like something someone would just do for fun. Anyways, this is the state of Russia and Ukraine right now, and it could get bad very soon. But back to our question at hand. Did The Simpsons predict Russia invading Ukraine? Well, kind of. Max Fisher for Fox writes, "The rapidly worsening tension between the United States and Russia, not to mention Russia's invasion and annexation of part of Ukraine, has got lots of people talking about a new Cold War." That's overstating things, but it's true that US-Russia relations are at the worst since the fall of the Berlin Wall, and Russian foreign policy is at its most aggressive. Even Russia hawks did not foresee things getting quite so bad quite so quickly, but someone did. The writing staff at The Simpsons. An old episode, Simpson Tide, predicted the return of the Soviet Union and a new Cold War back in 1998 when Boris Yeltsin was president and relations were good. The show began with Simpsons patriarch Homer Simpson joining the Navy, ending up on a submarine that accidentally gets into a shooting match with a Russian sub and wandering into Russian waters in what is taken as an attempt to defect. He then goes on to say that Russia's ambassador to the United Nations reveals that the collapse of the Soviet Union was just a ruse. Obviously, this was just a joke about how improbable it would be for a Russian official to push a button and bring back the Soviet Union. And of course, Russia's invasion of Ukraine does not mean that the Soviet Union is back. But there is a certain continuity between Russia today and during the Soviet Union, with its aggression in Eastern Europe and its anti-Western politics at home. So there you have it, folks. The Simpsons kind of predicted what is happening right now. I want to emphasize what Max Fisher wrote there about the Soviet Union as well. The Soviet Union isn't back, and an invasion of Ukraine doesn't mean that it's coming back or anything like that. But like he says, the Simpsons' prediction of Russian aggression towards Eastern Europe is certainly accurate. One thing that should be noted though is how the episode Simpson Tide ends. Nuclear war is anticipated and it looks as if everything's about to go to hell, but through some dumb luck, Homer manages to get out of it, and in the process, everything goes back to the way things were. So if we're putting our full faith into the Simpsons predictions, then we can at least take some comfort in the fact that they didn't predict a full-on World War III involving Russia. So that is a good thing. Granted, maybe taking the Simpsons predictions literally isn't the best idea either, because even if this predict would work in our favor, there are plenty of other ones that have been thrown out there through the years that definitely wouldn't. Did The Simpsons predict the China Olympics disaster? So as most of you are probably aware, the Winter Olympics are going on right now and will run until February 20th. These Olympics are being hosted by China and taking place in Beijing. So far, with roughly a week remaining, the Norwegians are cleaning up, with 9 gold medals and 21 total medals awarded to the country. As much as I'd love to talk about the Olympic events and the strategy behind the luge, this video isn't really about that though. The Olympics brings great events and great competition, but it also brings something else as well. A lot of attention. This attention is desirable to countries and part of the reason why they want to host the tournament in the first place. In fact, it's said that hosting the Olympics can increase a host country's global trade and stature. Britannica writes, China negotiated with the World Trade Organization opening trade for the country after being awarded the Beijing 2008 Summer Games. After a successful 1955 bid for the 1960 Summer Olympics in Rome, Italy joined the United Nations and began the Messina negotiations that led to the creation of the European Economic Community. The 1964 Tokyo Summer Games led to Japan's entry into the International Monetary Fund and the OECD. So it's clear that the Olympics can bring a lot of positives to the host country and will probably help their global footing in the long run. This isn't the case though if the vast media coverage you get during these games turns out to be negative. And that negative media coverage is exactly what's going on in China right now. These games, what should be a focus on human determination and a celebration of sport and competition, have turned into a media frenzy on how poorly China is hosting them right now. During the time that the Olympics have been running, several scandals and controversies have arisen that are detracting from the overall experience of the Olympics. This has been a pretty bad look for China and is doing the opposite of what they'd hoped for, decreasing their country's stature. Listen to the first sentence in this article written by TFI Global about what's going on right now. From manhandling a Dutch television reporter just outside the Winter Olympic opening ceremony to further agonizing its rivals like India and South Korea, China has done everything that it could have done to show its ugly face to the world at the Beijing Winter Olympics. That is not the type of media coverage that a country wants, and at this point, many are talking about these overall Olympics as a full-on disaster. But did anyone see this coming? Did somebody look ahead to these games and have a feeling that something could go wrong? A cartoon, perhaps? The Simpsons television show is not only one of the most successful TV shows ever, but their writers are also some of the most successful prophets ever too. It's gotten to a point now where if you look up the Simpsons predictions on Google, tons of articles and videos like this one will pop up talking about all the various things that they predicted in the past and all the things that we've got to watch out for in the future. These range from Trump's presidency to scandals involving fast food companies using horse horse meat instead of beef. In all of these predictions though, did they happen to get this one right? Did The Simpsons predict the China Olympics disaster? Well, first things first, let's look at this actual so-called disaster so we can see if they predicted it or not. Starting with the South Koreans. South Korea and China aren't on the best of terms outside of the Olympics, and these games definitely aren't helping their relationship. TFI Global says, in the men's 1,000 meter semifinals on Monday, South Korea's Hwang Dae-hyun and Lee Jeon-soo got disqualified from their respective heats for an illegal pass and lane change respectively. After these decisions, Chinese skaters were able to reach the final and grab the gold and silver medals. As if this wasn't enough, South Korea also got angry about cultural appropriation by China. A performer at the opening ceremony wore a traditional Korean dress called hanbok. China was clearly trying to pass off the Korean attire as its own, which has stoked anti-Chinese sentiment in South Korea. Both social media and mainstream media in the country have criticized China's brash behavior. Even the center-left Hankyoreh newspaper condemned China's actions and stated, "We need to continue developing neighborly relations with China, but we also need to be willing to stand up against attempts to distort history." It should also be noted, guys, that those disqualifications were considered super weak, and people have been accusing the referees as tampering with the games and helping out the Chinese athletes. They've also been doing some very questionable things with the media as well. Unlike Canada or the United States, China monitors pretty much everything that the media says and does not allow any slanderous material to be released. If you do release such content, then life could get pretty rough for you if you live in China. Well, recently they've shown that they feel the same way about other countries' reporters as well. TFI Global once again writes, on Friday, when China hosted the Winter Olympics opening ceremony at the Bird's Nest in Beijing, a Dutch television reporter was literally manhandled and stopped from presenting live on air just outside the venue. The journalist Sjors Dundas could be heard saying, "We are now being pulled out of here." He added, "We have just been expelled from another area, so I'm afraid we'll have to come back to you later." Literally manhandling the media really isn't the way to increase your country's status. Among the things that I've already mentioned, China has also reportedly pissed off India and Russia during these Olympics too. They've had some propaganda surrounding people with certain heritages completely backfire on them, and they've also had horrible stories from the athletes come out. The food is apparently garbage, the living conditions for the athletes aren't great by any means, and also the actual locations for the events haven't been properly maintained. The ski slope, for instance, has been under some harsh criticism, with people saying that the conditions are not nearly at the standard that they should be. Also, to couple with all of this, these Olympics are currently on pace to have the worst viewership in Olympic history ever. They're literally pulling half of the viewership that was raked in during the Winter Olympics that took place 4 years ago. All in all, these games are a total disaster, and at this point, looking like a bit of a wash. So with all of that being said though, was this predicted by The Simpsons? Well, last Olympics, The Simpsons predicted two very strange and very unique events. The first one was that the United States of America would win the gold medal in curling, and they would do it by beating Sweden. The Simpsons literally had this outcome fully happen in an episode that was released back in 2010, and then that's exactly what happened in the 2018 Olympics when the States won. The second thing that they predicted was a squirrel running onto the Olympic course mid-event. This happened to a snowboarder as they were riding down the mountain, and something very similar transpired on The Simpsons where a squirrel ran out into the mountain and then got smoked. The squirrel in real life was actually avoided, but it was still close enough that people drew comparisons. With some crazy predictions like that, people were looking ahead towards this Olympics to see if The Simpsons would get any right this time, but sadly, so far, that actually hasn't been the case. At this point, it almost feels wrong to say that they haven't predicted something right in regards to these Olympics, but nothing has come out yet about their astounding ability to prophesize the future. This is pretty shocking actually, because with all of the controversy surrounding these Olympics and the nature of the Simpsons television show, it feels like this is a goldmine for things that they could have predicted. Granted, I'm sure that we could find something from the TV show about the media being silenced or country relationships going sour, but there's been nothing specifically tied to the Olympics, and therefore we'd probably be stretching it a bit by saying they predicted something. That being said, there is still time. There should be just a little bit less than a week remaining of the Olympics. With the way things are going, I wouldn't be surprised to see any number of controversies or scandals coming out. Although if the viewership keeps dropping the way that it is, maybe none of us will even be around to see it if it does happen.
Starting us off at number 10, autocorrect. Way back in 1994, which was actually the year I was born, believe it or not, the iPhone wasn't even a thought. Or maybe it was, but I doubt anyone aside from Steve Jobs, maybe Steve Wozniak and a few others knew about it. There was the Apple Newton, which was a short-lived digital assistant from the 90s. A failed iPhone, if you will. Regardless, in 94, The Simpsons aired an episode called Lisa on Ice. It's from season 6, episode 8, and included a little jab at Apple's failed experiment. However, it also seems to have predicted the future. During a segment in the episode, two of Springfield's bullies are sitting in an assembly when one reminds the other to use his Newton to set a reminder to beat up Martin. As Doof writes a note to beat up Martin on his Newton phone, or assistant, it auto-corrected and reads out, "Eat up Martin." Aside from making fun of one of the very reasons the invention was a failure, it just didn't work properly, somehow the show's creators were able to predict Apple products would always get the autocorrect wrong. Apparently, I ducking love things a lot. Number 9. Three-Eyed Fish. This is the one that will always stand out the most to me simply because it's just too accurate. Now, one could argue that to make the assumption something like this would eventually happen wouldn't be so crazy. At the same time, no other show or movie really joked about it before The Simpsons, so what does that tell you? Season 2, episode 4, which aired back in 1990, Bart ends up fishing near the Springfield power plant, where he discovers Blinky, the Simpsons' beloved three-eyed fish. Now, as previously mentioned, the idea of radioactive materials being dumped into large bodies of water always concerned us, as we knew there were definitely some sort of possibilities of mutations or genetic repercussions, if you will. And it turns out that was confirmed in 2011 when an Argentinian man started to make headlines after he caught a three-eyed fish while out fishing with some friends. It turns out the fish was caught in a reservoir where a power plant pumps hot water from their facility, and clearly the water just gets polluted. Fisherman Julian Zmutt said, I quote, "We were fishing and we got the surprise of getting this rare specimen. As it was dark at the time, we did not notice, but then you looked at him with a flashlight and saw that he had a third eye." At number 8, Ebola breakout. Now I will admit guys, this one is a bit of a stretch, but some people are arguing that The Simpsons did predict it. Ultimately, I'm more so here to kind of just present the facts and let you guys decide or argue in the comments down below. I'm just a creator of chaos. It was the year of 1997, and The Simpsons had aired an episode titled Lisa's Sacks, Season 9, Episode 3. A clip from the episode shows Marge holding a Curious George book, which shows the adventurous monkey laying in bed sick. The book's cover reads Curious George and the Ebola virus. Now, as you may or may not remember, back in 2014, there was an Ebola epidemic. The majority of cases broke out in countries such as Liberia, Sierra Leone, and Guinea, but there were also a few cases in the US, Italy, and the UK, however, nothing like what we're seeing now. Still, the amount of lives lost in West Africa, specifically the countries affected most by the epidemic, were in the thousands. It lasted for about 3 years, starting at the end of 2013, and lasting all the way until 2016. Again, the episode of The Simpsons referencing the virus was from 1997, and some people made the argument that they predicted Ebola would have an outbreak and turn into a country or worldwide issue. Now, if it wasn't a known virus before the episode, I'd say that's pretty crazy. However, there were 2 Ebola outbreaks, small in comparison to the 2014 one, but still outbreaks nonetheless, that both occurred in 1996. The first is in Sudan, which is when the virus is believed to have first been identified. Of course, they didn't realize what it was until after the fact. The second outbreak occurred in the Congo Republic, when it was known as Zaire. Both occurrences led to a total of about 430 deaths and about 600 total infections. So did The Simpsons predict an outbreak? I mean, I guess it depends who you ask. On to number 7, we got censoring Michelangelo's sculpture, David. Say that fast 3 times. From season 2, episode 9, titled Itchy and Scratchy and Marge, the mother of the household decides she no longer wants Bart and Lisa to watch Itchy and Scratchy because it's too violent. Taking things a step further, Marge then also decides she's going to create the Springfieldians for Nonviolence, Understanding, and Helping. It was a group of Karens before Karens even existed. You can add that to their list of things they predicted, I guess. Jeez. Back to Marge's group here. When a traveling exhibition showing off the classic piece of David came to Springfield, members of the group were pushing to protest its appearance due to, well, you know, the full frontal. David showing it all, baby. Marge disagrees, saying that it's just art, which then leads to Marge realizing the hypocrisy in the situation. Not the point here. Point is, The Simpsons predicted this idea that someone would want Michelangelo's masterpiece, David, to be covered up. And in July 2016, a woman in St. Petersburg, Russia, complained that a plastic replica of the statue was inappropriate for children as it was placed near a school and a church. This led to a vote among locals to decide whether or not they should cover his pecker. Like, this is where we're going now, guys. Number 6, the Horsemeat Scandal. Man, I was so set up to make a great segue from that Michelangelo David situation to the Horsemeat Scandal, but I didn't. And here we are. Now, if you paid attention to the news or lived in Europe in 2013, specifically the UK, then you almost definitely know about the Horsemeat Scandal. Season 5, episode 19, titled Sweet Seymour Skinner's Badass Song, shows a segment of lunch lady Doris dipping her hands into a massive drum labeled assorted horse parts, now with more testicles. Fantastic. Obviously playing on the idea that Springfield Elementary is heavily underfunded, this episode aired way back in 1994, and it was meant as a joke. But in 2013, a horsemeat scandal across Europe, which is referred to as the biggest food fraud of the 21st century, affected numerous countries. France, Russia, Iceland, and England to name a few, all who were delivered mislabeled products. Items which read 100% beef included other types of meat from horses, pigs, and God knows what else. Probably one of the most accurate predictions out there, considering how they use that meat for school lunches. At number 5, FIFA corruption. Again, the idea of corruption among the FIFA community isn't so far-fetched. It's the biggest sport in the world, very profitable, and, well, it's a sport, which, as we've seen in the past, can sometimes lead to big money, especially if you know you're going to win. All the time. We've heard of dives in boxing, people being paid off to lose, and in 2015, a huge FIFA scandal broke, which resulted in numerous arrests after allegations of corruption. In a 2014 Simpsons episode titled You Don't Have to Live Like a Referee, episode 16, season 25, a very quick cut shows the front page of a French newspaper. The headline in French reads, Scandale de football, and shows an executioner at a guillotine about to execute a soccer referee. Now, obviously, the 2015 scandal didn't lead to any executions, but as previously mentioned, there was a massive FIFA scandal that happened a year after The Simpsons joked about one happening. I mean, if that isn't a coincidence, then they predicted the future. Like, bottom line, no questions asked. It's just, that's what happened. On to number 4, legalization of cannabis in Canada. We're going way back to 2005, when The Simpsons showed a Canadian version of Ned Flanders, offering the Springfield version what he referred to as a reeferino. Episode 6, season 16, titled Midnight RX, has Homer, Apu, Flanders, and Homer's dad, Grandpa, head across the border to Manitoba to purchase cheaper meds for the people of Springfield. This is after Mr. Burns tells the employees of the power plant he's cutting their prescription drug plans. While in Canada, Ned runs into his Canadian self, an almost identical version of Ned, but with a slight Canadian accent and different appearance. After going back and forth with their howdiddly-hoes, Canadian Ned pulls out a joint and asks original Ned if he wants to puff on a reeferino, following up with, "It's legal here." Ned, angry, replies, "They warned me Satan would be attractive, let's go." In 2018, Canada would legalize recreational cannabis countrywide. Simpsons predicted it, and let me tell you guys, it's fun. At number 3, rigged voting machines. It's fair to argue technology does screw up, but this was a very accurate screw up if you ask me. Episode 4, season 20, which was actually a Treehouse of Horror episode, aired on November 2nd, 2008. The opening scene showed Homer trying to vote for presidential nominee at the time, Barack Obama. However, every time he pressed to vote for Obama, the machine, obviously rigged, tallied a vote for his opponent, John McCain. During the 2012 election, when President Obama was eyeing a re-election over Mitt Romney, there was a voting machine which literally tallied votes for Obama against him. There was even video footage of it happening, and to no surprise, people blame The Simpsons for this one, which again, like, how do they, like, they could say any technology could screw up, how do they know a voting machine? Come on. At number 2, Nobel Prize winner. In season 22, episode 1, titled Elementary School Musical from 2010, a very quick cut shows a betting pool that Martin, Lisa, Database, and Milhouse filled out. The pool was for who would win which Nobel Prize, with the categories including physics, chemistry, economics, and literature. Of the names on the list, Milhouse placed a bet that MIT professor Bengt Holmstrom would win the Nobel Prize for economics. And guess what happened in 2016, folks? Now, maybe it's just one of those things that was bound to happen eventually just because of, you know, how smart this guy is, but still, very impressive, even if it is 6 years later. Number 1, Ted Cruz's Cancun trip. Given how recently the events took place, this is freakishly accurate. You guys may or may not know, but during the Texas deep freeze, Texas Senator Ted Cruz was caught trying to flee to Cancun. He claimed to have just been chaperoning his family and had every intention of returning back immediately, but it seems that was just a cover-up because he got caught. I mean, why do you need to chaperone your family on a flight? Especially while your people, Texans, are literally freezing to death. Cruz would later admit to his mistake, as he called it, but it seems back in 1993, season 4, episode 21, titled Marge and Chains, Springfield's mayor did something very similar. Now, this episode is actually the one that predicted the pandemic and murder hornets, if you guys remember. So in the episode, a pandemic takes over Springfield, and Mayor Quimby is seen addressing the people from his office, or so we think. After a man cuts in front of him with drums during the live broadcast, we see that the mayor fled his town to a beach, which is where he's been reporting from. Wearing a suit and a tie top with flip-flops and a bathing suit, as well as the backdrop of his office, Quimby tried to fool his own people and got caught. Seems like they know something that we don't.